Welcome back, boils and ghouls. Most of you are probably familiar with Robert Lawrence Stein, or R.L. Stein, but chances are you're more familiar with him for his children's horror series Goosebumps. Some of my fondest childhood memories involve reading those books until I was too scared to turn off the light to go to sleep. I also remember that my grandparents had Don't Go Into the Basement and that Haunted Mask one on VHS. And they lived in British Columbia, and I grew up in Ontario, but I did get to take a plane out to see them every summer, and watching those VHSs became part of the ritual. My point is, it would be pretty safe to say that Goosebumps played a major part of my childhood, and a lot of people who grew up in the 90s feel the same way. But there was also this other book that I remember having in my collection. I don't know where it came from. My mom did have a tendency to go to garage sales and just purchase whole boxes of children's literature for me, so honestly it could have just appeared in my house one day. It was also written by R.L. Stein, and it was another horror story aimed at a youthful audience. But this one was called Fear Street. And I honestly remember enjoying it a lot more than I did the Goosebumps books, because Fear Street was actually aimed at a slightly older audience. And when you look at the history of how Fear Street came to be made, it does seem to be a project that R.L. Stein cares a little bit more about than he does about Goosebumps. For one thing, the first Fear Street book was published in 1989. And although he has stopped writing books for years at a time, and even lost his publisher once, he's been releasing books in the series pretty steadily ever since then. Comparatively, the first Goosebumps book was released in 1992, after Scholastic commissioned Stein to produce another series of children's horror books. This one slightly more juvenile, after they saw the success that he had with Fear Street and other similar works. My point is, after my cursory and honestly probably lazy research on the subject, my biggest takeaway was this: R.L. Stein is writing Goosebumps to make money. And I'm not saying that he isn't writing Fear Street to make money, it's just that it does come across as a project that he's slightly more passionate about. There have been whisperings about a Fear Street movie since 1997.
When the mouse himself conspired to trick us all to give him more money,
by turning it into a teen slasher flick inspired by Scream. When that didn't pan out, the project passed through multiple hands, and was even delayed as a result of the 2020 coronavirus outbreak, before finally finding a place as a trilogy of movies to be released on Netflix. The first Fear Street movie was released on July 2nd, and I have to be honest, it's pretty clear that it's just that Scream-inspired teen slasher flick that we were supposed to get in the 90s. It's even set in 1994. And keep in mind that I haven't read all 51 of the original Fear Street novels. But from what I can gather, the first Fear Street movie is not a direct adaptation of any novel. The closest thing that I can find to a book with an even similar plot is The Wrong Number, which focuses on a girl named Dina making prank calls with her brother and her best friend. Fear Street Part 1 also has a protagonist named Dina, and prank calls do play a minor role in the plot, so minor in fact that I don't even know why it's there. Unless it's supposed to play into a sequel or something, I don't know, we'll see. But in the book, Dina's brother is named Chuck and her best friend is named Jade. Well, in the movie, her brother is named Josh and her best friend has been replaced by her girlfriend named Sam. But the movie lacking a clear literary parallel isn't necessarily a problem, especially considering the Fear Street books were mostly just, well, about Fear Street. The books take place in the fictional town of Shadyside, a perfectly normal town except for the fact that it's been cursed since the days of the Salem witch trials, when a witch hexed the land because his wife and daughter were unjustly burned at the stake. The books are mostly set in the modern day, however, mostly following the members of the family Good, the offspring of the witches, and the family Fear, the offspring of the men responsible for unjustly destroying the witches' family. Outside of that general setup, the books mostly just follow kids doing the normal types of things that kids do in these types of adventure books. Doing prank calls, discovering magic, making friends with serial killers, you know, that sort of thing. So what does Fear Street Part 1 have to offer? Especially if they aren't gonna limit themselves with the plot of just one book, they really do have a lot to work with here. Let's see if they take advantage of it. So the opening of this movie is a shot-for-shot rip-off of Scream. So this scene does mix it up a little bit by setting our victim in the mall after closing rather than home alone at night. We watch her wander around for a little bit before she runs into her friend, who acts totally normal and even offers to give her a ride home before receiving a message from Brundlefly.
What?
I didn't say anything, weirdo.
I woke up this morning thinking about a public execution.
Shortly after being left alone again, our victim gets attacked. And while running away, she encounters the corpses of the rest of the night crew, which, to be fair, is sort of a slasher movie cliche. So I won't accuse them of stealing from Scream exclusively, but the part of all this that I find especially egregious is this. It is shot for shot the same scene from Scream. The only difference is that Scream pans away from the killer's face reveal, whereas Fear Street reveals that her friend is the killer from minute 1. And I can't understand wanting to throw a reference to Scream in your opening, especially considering Scream has one of the most iconic openings in all of horror history. But it doesn't comment on what Scream did, this doesn't add anything, it's just lazy. It's like someone watched Scream and realized that the way that they had constructed their scene would actually benefit their script, so they just borrowed it line for line. The killer gets shot by the police, and at that point we're introduced to our actual protagonists, Dina and Josh. Josh is actually sort of a fun character. He's only really in the movie for the purpose of providing exposition, but they set him up as this video game enthusiast slash hacker, which does allow him to have a couple of cool moments.
You got any change?
No. But I am. What do you want?
I'm a boss-ass bitch!
But I do have to go on a brief tangent here and complain about what they set up as Josh's major conflict. And that's that he spends way too much time on the internet, which makes Dina concerned for his social life. And can I just say this? My family was very controlling of my every action when I was younger, so I don't know if I would have had a social life if it wasn't for the internet. I've formed deep and important friendships with people from countries that I've never visited, all because of the internet. Technically speaking, I'm only with my partner today because Tinder exists. I honestly believe that people just think that the internet leads to a lack of socialization, ignoring the fact that most people are using social media to socialize. There are definitely some interesting studies that suggest that the internet age has changed the way that we socialize. But at the same time, I feel like the internet is just such a new concept within human civilization, so we don't really have a way to grasp the way that it's going to affect us going forward. And that thought simply terrifies some people. But change doesn't necessarily have to be bad. Just because socialization today doesn't look like socialization did 100 years ago, that doesn't mean that it's bad, it just means that it's different. And we should be getting used to it rather than fighting against it. Moving on to Dina, I've been trying to think of a softer way to say this because there are some things about Dina's just general existence that I do appreciate. But I think I've got to be honest here. I kind of hate her. She's just like the least likable protagonist that I've seen in a while. And the only saving grace is that Kiana Madeira is such a bland actress that I can't bring myself to care enough to hate her. When we're introduced to Dina, we're told that she's mourning a recent breakup with her partner Sam.
I need you to give this to Sam tonight.
No way, Dina. I am not getting mixed up in your ex drama.
And when we're later introduced to Sam, we find out that, shock of all shocks, she's a girl. Which I do hope that we all saw coming when they gave Dina's absent ex the most gender-neutral name ever. Sam and Dina. Wait. Sam and Dina. Motherfucker, Wincest Shippers, will you leave me alone?
What's a slash fan?
Sam/Dean together.
They do know we're brothers, right?
Doesn't seem to matter.
Anyway, Sam and Dina argue for a bit, with Dina blaming Sam for their breakup despite being the one who ended the relationship. Dina feels that Sam was never proud to be with her and that she's living in the closet, as Sam moved on to a relationship with a boy shortly after the breakup. But this whole thing is just so clumsily handled and it has frustrating implications. For one thing, we did not see Sam and Dina's relationship when they were together. We saw no evidence of Sam being ashamed of Dina or of being ashamed of being queer. The only thing that we have physically seen is that Sam is with a boy and Dina is jealous. And I know that we're supposed to assume that Sam is only with this boy because she's in the closet. But the only person who ever tells us this is Dina, and she's already hostile towards Sam on account of the breakup. So for all we know, Sam is just a bisexual girl living her best life, and Dina is her jealous ex who won't let her move on. I know we're not supposed to think that, but the movie never even acknowledges that as a possibility, an obvious example of bisexual erasure. And Dina's behavior towards Sam can be extremely harmful if Sam is a bisexual girl. She's essentially forcing Sam into another sort of closet, albeit a slightly different one. And it's also frustrating because I honestly know that I only feel this way because of my personal experience. If I were a lesbian watching this movie, then I might be able to see a beautiful love story between two girls just trying to encourage each other to be better. But I'm not a lesbian. I'm a pansexual person. And what I see is a bitter girl forcing herself into her ex's life and trying to manipulate her into believing that she's something that she's not, all for her own selfish benefit. And so much of their screen time revolves around this drama that if you can't get attached to it for whatever reason, then there just isn't much about this relationship to get attached to. I'm sorry, I really wish that I liked this couple more. And if you do find them an empowering couple, then more power to you. I just don't think I can personally view it that way because of my experience. And I really wish that this was the only way that they made Dina unlikable, but oh boy, it gets worse. So after Dina and Sam argue, this turns into a rumble between the Socs and the Greasers of this universe. You see, this movie is set in the fictional town of Shadyside, which, similar to its counterpart in the book, is supposed to be cursed, resulting in a higher crime rate. Opposite to Shadyside, we get Sunnyvale, which is just a town. Apparently it's a very nice place to live. Sam has recently moved to Sunnyvale, which is another reason that Dina is mad at her. Which I have to admit, I know that some people just aren't into long-distance relationships, but Sam mentions that she's only a half-hour's drive away.
I am half an hour away.
Which is the same distance that was between me and my partner when we first met, and neither one of us drive. I'm just saying, they could make it work if they wanted to. Dina needs to stop blaming Sam that she just didn't care enough about their relationship to keep trying. In the middle of this Greaser rumble, Dina takes things a little bit too far by throwing a cooler at a moving car containing her ex, endangering Sam's life and sending the car careening into the woods. I mean, don't get me wrong, we all have exes that we'd like to see in a non-fatal accident, but there's a reason why we don't act on these thoughts. We write vivid descriptions of them in our dream journals and then burn those thoughts away like adults. Sam stumbles out of the totaled car and sees visions of the witch. witch. Now, the witch is the reason why the town is cursed, but in the movie, her name is Sarah Fear. Literally nothing about Sarah Fear is established in this first movie, and because of that, I do think that I'm gonna have to wait until probably about the third movie to talk about her, as that is literally the only movie in this series that establishes anything about Sarah Fear. On the one hand, I understand that the way that these movies were released was not necessarily the way that a lot of movies are released. We got 3 movies very consecutively, one after another, so I understand why the writers would feel that it's okay to leave out important plot points for later movies to establish on. But that being said, I definitely think that the first movie as a standalone film suffers from its lack of exploration into Sarah Fear's character. If you plan to only watch the first movie and none of the sequels, then you're gonna get a half-formed movie with an uninteresting, underdeveloped villain. That's all that you're going to get. More information about Sarah Fear will be filled in later, so I guess that how you feel is just sort of dictated by how much patience you have with that sort of thing. Anyway, the beginning of the movie makes a big deal out of the fact that the witch can apparently possess people and drive them to a murderous rampage, which is what happened to the killer at the beginning of the movie. And it's what I assumed was happening to Dina when she attempted to murder Sam. Your nose! But apparently, nah, she was just a
Lovely person.
and it's what I assumed was happening to Sam in this scene when she's receiving visions of the witch. But nah, apparently the witch is just gaining a taste for her blood. And thus we get to the main conflict of the movie. Sarah Fear wants to kill Sam, and so she's sending her zombie minions to do it. The zombie minions are okay. I like the design of the one that keeps singing that creepy song.
Hey. Are you okay?
And then our slasher villain, who's being set up as the adversary for the next movie, is clearly inspired by The Town That Dreaded Sundown or by Baghead Jason. But I definitely would have liked to see more of them in the movie. I'm hoping that that's something that they'll fix in the sequels. Ultimately, the movie ends up following Evil Dead remake logic, and concluding that the witch won't stop until Sam is dead, so they have to kill her themselves and bring her back before it's too late. And I'm not gonna show the scene in question because it could be potentially triggering to people, but we then watch Dina shove an entire bottle of pills down Sam's throat until she vomits. At which point, Dina then proceeds to drown Sam. And I do kinda wish that I could show you this scene because this is definitely an example of Kiana Madeira being a less than stellar actress. She honestly just goes about the whole thing just way too casually for me. I think back on that scene from the Evil Dead remake where the protagonist had to kill his sister, and I really believed that he didn't want to go through with it. And I do understand that in a life or death situation, you might end up going about it through a whole, matter-of-fact, business-oriented sort of way, just get it over with. But at the same time, it just makes Dina such an unlikable protagonist because I personally think about what it must take to hold a loved one's head underwater, and this scene is actually extremely difficult to watch, especially if you or someone that you love has dealt with suicide. That might actually be the point to the scene, because this is a horror movie and its entire point is to make its audience uncomfortable. But I also can't deny that this was the final nail in the coffin for me as far as Dina's character goes. Anyone who can do that to someone they love without shedding a tear is not someone I want to see as a protagonist. It's really annoying too because I'm aware that I'm focusing on nitpicky little things that don't actually matter. Like, I know that the writers intend for us to read Sam as a closeted lesbian, so their love story is technically fine. But the fact that they didn't even consider that she could be bisexual is especially offensive to me and has some frustrating implications for the story. Like, honestly, how hard would it have been to just have Sam confidently and directly identify herself as a lesbian or gay? And I know that the only reason that Dina comes off as so blasé at the end of the movie is because Kiana Madeira is such a bad actress. actress. But the fact that she is makes it look so bad. Like, how hard would it have been to just cast an actress who could carry the scene if you knew it was gonna be in your movie? Obviously, killing Sam makes the zombies disappear, and they manage to bring her back to life. The cops decide to blame everything on Dina's friends, who were drug dealers. And we actually do get this pretty cool speech at the end by Dina about how people are so quick to judge.
Another shady side tragedy.
An underprivileged overachiever with bright prospects. A guy who's been supporting his family alone since he was 15. Both succumbing to the quick cash of drugs.
Fits the narrative, right?
And then we get this scene where Sam finally gains up the courage to come out to her mom. And as much as I do have my problems with the way that Dina and Sam's relationship is portrayed, this is still a very nice and empowering moment for Sam. But we still have to get the setup for that sequel. So Sam suddenly turns into one of the witch's zombies, leading Dina to turn to the survivor of the 1978 massacre that the next movie is gonna be about. Now, do you want to hear the funny thing about my thoughts on this movie, despite the amount of ranting that I've been doing? I actually don't hate it. I do see the movie that they intended to make, and that movie is a cute, fun teen slasher flick with some zombies. That's exactly what this movie is, and I do have to admit, I appreciate that they were willing to talk about queerness in any factor. I do appreciate that they didn't go for that easy bury your gays trope like I was afraid they would from the trailer. There's a part of my soul that dies when I hear the characters that have literally just been established to be queer women deliver the line, "Maybe we are just doomed." Bury your gays is literally a trope in movies. I just think that the movie sometimes suffers from some lazy writing, but that isn't something that can't be fixed with another pass over the script. So I am actually extremely hopeful for these sequels. We won't have to wait long, fortunately, so make sure to click that subscribe button for my thoughts on Fear Street Part 2, 1978. As far as the first movie goes, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to give it 6.5 Baghead Jasons out of 10. Definitely worth the watch, just not overly memorable. Thank you so much for joining me here today, my pets, and I will see you next time. Love you. Although donating to my Patreon is unnecessary, it is hugely appreciated. As little as $3 a month could help me put out many more videos. On that note, I'd like to thank Wilson L. Ricks III, Scott Falks, Andre K, and Thrill House. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world to me. I can't wait to see you all next time.